Locked Up, The Wrongful Conviction Files, Episode 7, A Meeting of Disbelief and Destiny. Welcome to Episode 7 of Locked Up, The Wrongful Conviction Files. I'm your host, Roger Warstone. In our last episode, we recounted the most disheartening moment of this entire case, a shocking guilty verdict handed down by a jury that chose to ignore the mountain of evidence screaming for a different outcome. We saw a man sentenced to life in prison, his future stolen, not by facts, but by the perceptions and biases that linger within the system, the justice system. But as I've said before, the truth doesn't just go away, it lingers in the file, waiting for someone to find it. At the close of our last episode, I revealed two crucial breakthroughs: a letter from the key witness JW, admitting he lied in the testimony, and a forensic detail about the bullet that was inconsistent with the alleged murder weapon. Today, we take our first step out of the shadows of the past and into the blinding light of action. This is no longer a historical investigation, it's a fight for a man's future. I'm going to take you inside the most important meeting of this case, a pivotal moment where the destinies of three men, a detective, a pastor, and a lawyer, converge. It's the story of what happens when faith, determination, and healthy dose of disbelief come together to challenge a system that has failed. This is Locked Up. Let's begin. This segment is the pastor's faith. The discovery of a new evidence was a shot of pure adrenaline. The case file, which for so long felt like a dead end, now hummed with a renewed sense of purpose. I had a whole pad of notes, everything laid out perfectly, and I was ready. I couldn't wait to share my findings with the one person who had believed in this mission from the very start. I picked up the phone, then called the pastor. The moment he answered, I could hear a different kind of energy in his voice. It wasn't the tired hope of a man facing a huge challenge, but the vibrant, expectant tone of someone who believed in a miracle. It was as if the grace of God, he knew I had great news for him. And I did. And I didn't just tell him what I found. I laid out my entire strategy, starting with the core principle of any criminal case. I explained that for my work to truly help the client, we had to dismantle the prosecution's narrative by attacking its three fundamental pillars: the evidence, the witness, and the motive. My job was to find the faults and the holes in each one of them, to prove that the entire case was a house of cards built on a foundation of lies. I told him that everything in the file appeared to have been fabricated to fit a charge, and that the motive, the felony murder charge of robbery, was a complete invention designed to justify a conviction. The first point of attack, I said, had to be the witness. I told him that our main focus on this entire investigation was the key witness, JW, the man who had audacity to write a letter from jail admitting he lied. I explained that while he was the central figure, we couldn't just go to him first. He had to be the last one we interviewed. The reason was simple: if we confronted him too early, he could clam up, or worse, be influenced by outside parties. Our strategy was to interview everyone else who was present at the crime scene. Their original police statements were a mess of contradictory claims, and I was convinced that by talking to them again, we will find the real reason why there were so many different stories. I was going to do deep background checks on every witness to see where they were now, their past, and their motives. We needed to fill in the gaps and prove that the entire tapestry of testimony was a poorly woven lie. The pastor took all of this in. his excitement growing with every word. He quickly relayed this information to the client, who until now had never even seen the part in the discovery about the impossible gun timeline. The fact that the gun was not even available until days after the murder was a hidden gem in the file, something that previous defense had completely missed. It was the first solid piece of paper that proved the prosecution's core story was a fraud. It confirmed my suspicion I had from the beginning that a lie of this magnitude must have been born out of desperate deal. We need to find out who made the deal, who gave the deal, and what they got in return. This wasn't just a matter of justice for the client. It was a matter of exposing a system that would sacrifice a man's life for a conviction. The pastor's relief was palpable. He felt as if they were finally on the right track. This next segment is a question of ammunition. Next, I moved on the second pillar, the evidence. I told the pastor that the gun, the body, and the bullet had to fit together as if they were a final puzzle. And based on what I had read, they were pieces from three different puzzles. First, there was the timeline of the gun itself. The person who claimed to have sold the weapon to the client did not have it until 3 days after the murder. It was an impossibility that no one in the trial had bothered to even acknowledge. It was a clear indication that the gun found was not the murder weapon. But I have found something more. Something that not only confirmed the gun was wrong, but provided an undeniable forensic truth that was hidden in plain sight. I explained the two major discrepancies from the autopsy report. First, the medical examiner's testimony that the wound was a contact wound, a shot fired with the weapons pressed directly against the victim's body. This was a scientific fact proven by the presence of the soot driven into the wound channel. But the 40 caliber Taurus the police claimed was the murder weapon had a safety mechanism that physically prevented from being fired at such close range. The gun could not have been shot. It was a direct, irrefutable contradiction from the prosecution's own experts. Second, I had gone back to the autopsy report and found the grain weight of the bullet fragment in the victim's lung. The grain amount was too low to be that of a 40 caliber. The standard grain for a 40 caliber is typically between 155 to 180 grains. The fragment that was found significantly lower, putting it more in line with a 9 millimeter bullet, which usually has a grain weight of possibly around 115 to 147 grains. I also noted that the wound circumference was smaller than that of a 40 caliber would typically leave. To make it even more compelling, the client, in his panic initial statements, had mentioned that JW might have had a 9 millimeter weapon with him that night. This was the ammunition we needed to move forward. I told the pastor we needed to hire our own ballistic expert to review the case. I wanted him to conduct tests to prove that the bullet could not have been a 40 caliber and that that wound was inconsistent with the police theory. I also wanted to bring in our own medical examiner to review the findings and the testimony given by the prosecution's expert. We could prove that the medical examiners had testified outside of his scope of expertise, which should have been inadmissible. We needed to show the court with precision that the evidence didn't match the gun and that the only reason they got a conviction was because they were allowed to speculate. This was a matter of science, not emotions. The pastor listened, his excitement almost overwhelming. He was filled with such a sense of purpose and relief. He told me he felt like he had finally found a detective who was willing to work and believed this case had a real chance. It wasn't about luck anymore, it was about strategy, hard work, and paper trail. This segment is the meeting. The pastor quickly set up a meeting with a new lawyer, and it was time for me. to present my findings. I walked into the office, a man with a singular focus and a pad full of evidence. But from the start, the lawyer was cutting me off. He wasn't hearing me out, and it was driving me crazy. His questions were short, his tone was dismissive. He clearly found no link in with me, and I wasn't sure if it was because I didn't look like him or because my accent. I tend to speak very slowly, and sometimes I enunciate words very poorly. But I wasn't there to make friends. I was there to provide the ammunition he needed to fight for a man's life. In my life, since I was a kid, I've always been the best at what I do, whether it was on the soccer field or in the military. I see things differently. I have a passion for my work and I speak with direct confidence. And I stood up to him and I told him to either let me finish or I was going to walk out. The room went silent. But the pastor, like always, he settled everything down and allowed me to finish. I held my ground and delivered my presentation using a large paper pad to lay out all my findings. I began with the witness statements and the timeline. I showed him that every single witness has stated the client was by the right front passenger door of the car. And then I showed him a diagram of the victim and the location of his wound on the lower left side of his back. It was physically impossible for a right handed shooter to create that kind of contact wound from that position. It just didn't add up. When I told him that the witness also said the client only shot at the car as it was taking off, the pastor's face broke into a smile. He fell to his knees with joy. I don't think anyone had really looked at the case file and put all of these pieces together like I had. Everything was as clear as water. After this part of the case was finished and the lawyer had ammunition he needed, I knew my next step. While they worry about the expert witness, I had to find a different kind of truth. I had to go back to the source. This is the closing. For so long, this case has felt like a brick wall. A wall of lies built by a flawed system, a desperate witness, and a prosecution determined to get a conviction. But in that office, with a pad of paper and a single undeniable fact, we found the crack. The physical evidence, the right handed shooter on the passenger side, the contact wound on the left side of the back, proved that the prosecution story was a lie. The pastor's disbelief gave way to a powerful spiritual joy. He knew, as I did, that the impossible had just become possible. But our fight isn't over. A lawyer has the legal ammunition now, the forensic evidence needed to get this case back into a courtroom. My job, however, is different. A pad and a pen can expose a lie, but it can't make a person tell the truth. Now I have to go to the source. The witness who lied to put an innocent man in prison are still out there. I have to find them. I have to go back to the streets and confront the people who were at the scene at that night. And I have to get them all to tell me the story they were hiding. It's time to find out what really happened. It's time to expose the truth that no one wanted to admit. In our next episode, the search for the real story begins. The clock is ticking, the truth is waiting, and I'm not stopping until I get it. That's next time. Subscribe now because justice starts with a question, and I'm not done asking.